The Battle of Sarikamish, Russian, Turkish, Sarikamish Harikati, was an engagement between the Russian and Ottoman empires during World War I. It took place from December 22, 1914 to January 17, 1915 as part of the Caucasus Campaign. The outcome was a Russian victory. The Ottomans employed a strategy which demanded that their troops be highly mobile and to arrive at specified objectives at precise times. This approach was based both on German and Napoleonic tactics. The Ottoman troops, ill-prepared for winter conditions, suffered major casualties in the Allahu Akbar mountains. Afterward, Ottoman leader Enver Pasha publicly blamed his defeat on Armenians, and the battle was a prelude to the Armenian genocide. Background: Russia viewed the Caucasus Front as secondary to the Eastern Front, and the Eastern Front enjoyed the major share of Russian resources. Russia had taken the fortress of Kars from the Turks during the Russo-Turkish War in 1877, since when it was incorporated into the militarily administered Kars Oblast, and now feared a Caucasus campaign aimed at retaking Kars and the port of Batum. Kars Oblast was of immense strategic and symbolic importance to the Russian Empire, being seen and administered as a March principality that would spearhead further Russian expansion against the Muslim Ottomans. The Christian Orthodox population settled in Kars Oblast by the Russian government, including Georgians, Caucasus Greeks, and Christian Orthodox as well as non-Orthodox Armenians, had often previously fought in or collaborated with the Russian army to take the province from the Ottomans as a means of achieving their ambitions to expand Christian Orthodox territory at the expense of the Muslim Ottomans on the back of the Russian imperial enterprise. The Russian army now at Sarikamish included many of these same communities alongside ethnic Russians among both the soldier and officer ranks, and in particular senior Russian army officers of Armenian extraction. The Ottoman generalship and organization were negligible compared to the Russians. A Caucasus campaign would have a distracting effect on Russian forces. The plan found sympathy with German advisers in that a success in this region would mean a diversion of Russian forces to this front from the Polish and Galician fronts. Germany supplied resources and the Ottoman Third Army was used in the battle. The immediate strategic goal of the Caucasus campaign was to retake Artvin, Ardahan, Kars, and the port of Batum. As a longer-term goal, head of the Ottoman War Ministry Ismail Enver hoped a success would facilitate opening the route to Tbilisi and beyond, with a revolt of Caucasian Muslims. Another Turkish, or rather German, strategic goal was to cut Russian access to its hydrocarbon resources around the Caspian Sea. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company had exclusive rights to work petroleum deposits throughout the Persian Empire except in the provinces of Azerbaijan, Gilan, Mazandaran, Astrabad and Khorasan. In 1914, before the war, the British government had contracts with the company for the supply of fuel oil for the Navy. Prelude: the headquarters of the Ottoman Third Army was located in Erzurum under the command of Hasan Izzet. On October 30, 1914, the Third Army headquarters was informed by High Command in Istanbul about an exchange of fire during the pursuit of Goban and Breslau in the Black Sea. High Command expected the Russian army to cross the Ottoman border at any time. The Bergman offensive ended with the defeat of Russian troops under Bergman. The Russian success was along the southern shoulders of the line. Hasan Izzet stabilized the front by letting the Russians 25 kilometers inside the Ottoman Empire along the Erzurum-Sarikamish axis. The War Minister, Ismail Enver, devised an operation plan while he was at the Department of War in Istanbul. His strategy was based on German principles copied from Napoleon. Enver's plan involved a single envelopment using 3 corps. On the right flank, 11th Corps would fix the Russians in place and conduct feint attacks. In the center, 9th Corps would fight in the direction of Sarikamish Pass. Assistant Chief of Staff Colonel Hafiz Haki's 10th Corps, which was to be on the left flank, would drive to Oltu, cross the Allahu Akbar mountains, cut the Kaz Road, and drive the Russians to the Aras Valley, where the Russian forces would be destroyed by all three corps attacking in concert. Meanwhile, a detachment unit under Stang Bay would conduct highly visible operations to distract and pin Russian units. Success depended on all troops arriving at their specified objectives at the correct moment. The first part of the plan was fulfilled when the Russians concentrated their forces at Sarikamish and Koprukoy after the Bergman offensive. Hassan Izzat was not in favor of an offensive action in the harsh winter conditions. He was planning to remain in a defensive posture by pulling the Russians to Erzurum fortress and launching a counterattack. Hafiz Haki was sent to replace the commander of 10th Corps to energize the Third Army. Enver released Hassan Izzat from command on December 14. Izzat told Enver, "We have to consider 8 or 9 days for a large-scale encircling maneuver. However, during this time the 11th Corps, which will remain at the front, might be jeopardized. Even if we execute the maneuver with 2 corps, they will probably face difficulties against the enemy." Enver wanted his plan executed through a winter offense, and decided to take charge. He left Istanbul with General Fritz Bronzit von Skellendorf and the head of the operations office, Lieutenant Colonel Otto von Feldman. They arrived in Erzurum on December 21. Senior Turkish commanders opposed the forced resignation of Hassan Izzat due to his rejection of the plan. Battlefield. The war zone was nearly 1,250–1,500 kilometers wide from the Black Sea to Lake Van, which made military concentration difficult. The operation was executed at a plateau averaging 1,500–2,000 meters above sea level. The main difficulty with the region was the roads, with the transportation infrastructure on the Ottoman side far from adequate. Russia's main advantage was the Kars-Gyumri-Akarkalaki railway line and a terminal at Sarikamish. The railway was 24 kilometers from the border. The only way for an army to get through the Caucasian heights was the high mountain passes in which lay the cities Kars and Sarikamish. Beyond, the upper valleys of the Aras River and Euphrates extended westward. Everywhere else the roads were mere tracks which were impenetrable to artillery. The forces were concentrated about 80 kilometers on each side of the border at the fortresses of Kars on the Russian side and Erzurum on the Ottoman side. The Third Army, under the command of Enver, was composed of the IX, 10th and 11th Corps. Third Army's headquarters and the 9th Corps were located in Erzurum. The 10th Corps was stationed in Chivas, and the 11th Corps was in Elazığ. A detachment unit under the command of the German Lieutenant Colonel Stang was established from the 3rd Infantry Division, originally stationed in Thrace, to reinforce the offense and pin down the Russians. This detachment unit, known as Stanka Bay, consisted of 2 battalions of the 8th Infantry Regiment and 2 artillery batteries. The fighting power of 83,000 regular troops, reserves, and personnel from the Erzurum fortress totaled 118,000. The total manpower including transportation units, depot regiments, and military police was 150,000. There were 73 machine guns and 218 artillery pieces. Ottoman forces were inadequately prepared for the campaign. 2 divisions of the 9th Corps began a long trek with no winter clothing and only dry bread and olives for rations. The Russian Caucasus Army was a well-equipped 100,000 troops. However, the Russians redeployed almost half of the Caucasus Army to the Prussian front due to the defeats at the Battle of Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes, leaving behind 65,000 troops. To remedy these troop movements, Count Ilarion Ivanovich Vorontsov-Dashkov consulted with the mayor of Tbilisi, Alexander Kachin, the primate of Tbilisi, Bishop Mesrop, and the prominent civic leader Drive Hakov Zavriv about the creation of Armenian volunteer detachments. The Russian Armenian reservists had already been drafted into the regular armed forces and sent to the European theater. The The volunteer units consisted of Armenians, who were not citizens of the empire or obligated to serve. However, many other, non-Russian communities were also represented in the Russian Caucasus Army as volunteers, conscripts, and regular soldiers and officers. These particularly included men who belonged to Christian Orthodox communities settled in the surrounding Kars Oblast since 1878. Such as Georgians and Caucasus Greeks, who generally saw service in the Russian Imperial Army as a means of achieving their own community's ambitions to recapture Greek Orthodox territory from the Muslim Ottomans on the back of the Russian imperial enterprise. Originally, there were 4 volunteer battalions created along the Kars Oblast. The 3rd Battalion, commanded by Hamazasp, and 4th Battalion by Kerry, operated on the front facing Erzurum between Sarikamish and Olchu. The commander-in-chief of the Caucasian military district was Ilarion Ivanovich Vorontsov-Dashkov. Effective command was in the hands of Infantry General Alexander Zakharevich Myshlyevsky, who was originally a military historian graduated from the Imperial General Staff Academy. General Nikolai Yudenich was his chief of staff. Initial maneuvers, December 22 to 28. Hafiz Haki was at the left flank. His order was to move the 9th and 10th Corps to Sarikamish and Kars. He contemplated a 2-step plan, a sudden initial attack and a second step, with both corps proceeding at full speed towards Olchu. He expected the assault at Narman to be concluded by the afternoon of December 22. Then the corps would march 30 kilometers a day and arrive in the Kars-Sarikamish line by December 25. 2 divisions of the Stang Regiment had been sent by sea from Constantinople to Trabzon. On early December 22, Hafiz Haki ordered his troops to move forward. They engaged in a brief skirmish against a Russian brigade commanded by General Istomin near Kalabogazi, west of Olchu. The skirmishes at Kalabogazi ended the next day with the Ottomans capturing 4 artillery guns, 4 machine guns, and 1,000 Russian troops. On December 23, Istomin abandoned his position and moved towards Ardahan. Hafiz Haki sent 2 divisions to pursue Istomin. At the extreme left wing, the Stang Regiment, which had landed at Trabzon, was to move up the Kora Valley towards Ardahan and through a pass at 2,438 meters altitude. On December 23, the 92nd Regiment of the Turkish 31st Division, believing the unit in front of them to be Russians, opened fire on the flank of the 32nd Division. The ensuing 4-hour friendly fire battle in the fog killed 2,000 Turkish soldiers, and wounded many more. On December 24, Hafiz Haki was well beyond Olchu after having marched 75 kilometers in just over 3 days. However, they were not at the Kars-Sarikamish line as planned. On December 25, Ottoman troops had been marching for 14 hours under heavy snow. The soldiers were exhausted and hungry. The fear of frostbite and Russian machine guns was slowly being replaced by absolute indifference. In the early hours of December 26, at the 18th hour of the march, the 91st Regiment of 10th Corps came under enemy fire. The Russians left the scene after nearly 2 hours of fighting. The regiment resumed its march, and soon a snowstorm began. Under these conditions, the 91st Regiment managed to reach Kasor from Penek in 21 hours. Other units reached their destinations at a similar rate. While Enver was ordering a night attack, elements of the 10th Corps were spending the night in the villages of Kasor, Arsenic, and Patsik, which were 40, 35 and 30 kilometers from Sarikamish respectively. The Allahu Akbar mountains were still to be crossed. Thousands of Turkish soldiers died of hypothermia in the snow. The 10th Corps suffered a delay of 24 hours in the Barduz Pass, and 4th Battalion of the Armenian Volunteers lost 600 troops in a battle there. When Commander Malishevsky arrived at army headquarters in the Russian front lines, he gave the order for a general retreat. The process of withdrawing was to start on December 25 and 26. The Russians evacuated Sarikamish, leaving 2 cavalry squadrons and 1,000 railwaymen to defend it. Not all Russian commanders were in a state of panic. The Russian army headquarters maintained a solid grip on the situation, with the effective command and control never lost. General Yudenich, taking command of the 2nd Turkestan Corps, decided to put up resistance. On December 28, the Russians held by the 11th Corps at Khorasan. The 9th Corps were at Sarikamish. The 10th Corps were threatening to pierce the Russian front along the Kars Railway to the east. The Stang Regiment was descending upon Ardahan 60 miles to the northeast. Enver's operational plan was looking successful on paper. However, the Ottoman forces were worn out, half-starved, and short of guns and ammunition. They had no hope of reaching their objective on time. Enver thought that the Russians were retreating to Kars. It was actually an encircling movement. Assault at Sarikamish, December 29. On December 29, the assault took place. The 9th and 11th Corps, totaling 12,000 men, began to attack Sarikamish. During bayonet fighting, only 300 men succeeded in breaking into the city. They were driven off, losing 6,000 troops. Enver received information that Russians were preparing to encircle his forces with a force of 5 regiments. On December 31, the 9th Corps was bogged down in the woods outside Sarikamish and had been reduced to some 2,500 men and 14 artillery guns and machine guns. On the same night news arrived to headquarters from Bardais. The 32nd Division had abandoned its positions to the Russians. This meant that the Baduz and Kizilkalais roads were now in Russian hands. The Ottoman forces were inside a semicircle. Enver refused to lose momentum, and ordered his units to continue with the plan. On January 1, the commander of the 11th Corps pressed a frontal attack on Sarikamish that lasted for the next 4 days. After that the fighting began to lose momentum. Snow hindered advancing forces which were supposed to bring relief. The 9th Corps melted away on the way to Sarikamish. One of the divisions lost 40% of its strength in a snowstorm. The 10th Corps never came to the rescue. 90% of 10th Corps was left on the slopes of the Allahu Akbar Mountains. The 11th Corps was fighting in the Eris region. A regiment entered Tserkaskoy, only to be taken prisoner. While the Stang Regiment entered Ardahan on schedule, the troops were exhausted. The Russians were poised to encircle the remaining forces, and trapped in semicircle. January 2–3 On January 2, Russian artillery fire caused severe casualties. Enver received 2 reports. One was from the Chief of Staff of the 9th Corps, Lieutenant Colonel Serif, and the other from Colonel Hafiz Haki. Both reports said that they were too weak to launch another attack. Enver responded to the units. The offensive is to go on at full strength. Later Enver focused on securing routes for the retreat instead of insisting on new attacks to take Sarikamish. He combined the 2 corps and renamed it the Left-Wing Army. He promoted Colonel Hafiz Haki to Brigadier General and gave him command of the Left-Wing Army. On January 3, 1st Corps were driven out to the Korik Valley, in which direction the remnants of the 10th Corps were also retreating. Hafiz Haki was hoping for reinforcements. He did not order his units to retreat as he believed it could be still possible to take Sarikamish. Meanwhile, around 40 kilometers south, the 11th Corps led by Gallup was renewing attacks on Russian lines in an attempt to relieve the pressure on the 9th and 10th Corps positioned in front of Sarikamish. The Russians were advancing and the circle was getting narrower. On January 4, Hafiz Haki toured the front line. He told Hassan that the battle was over unless some of the troops on the Allahu Akbar Mountains were still alive. Retreat, January 4–15 On January 6, the 3rd Army headquarters found itself under fire. The Russians captured the entire 28th Division. The 17th and 29th Divisions were taken prisoner. 8 senior officers including Hassan surrendered to the Russians. Among the captives, 108 officers and 80 soldiers transferred to Sarikamish. Hafiz Haki managed to safely reach the headquarters of 10th Corps. He was told that 9th Corps had fallen into the hands of Russians and ordered a total retreat. On January 7, the remaining forces began their march towards Erzurum. On January 11, after 4 days of travel, Enver and the German officers reached Erzurum. They had stipulated in their original plan that the same route could be taken by the advancing Third Army in 2 days. The transports dispatched from Constantinople, which attempted to land troops and provisions at Trabzon, were sunk by a Russian Black Sea squadron in warships. The escorts SMS Gobin and TCG Hamidiye were chased back to the Bosphorus. On January 17, the remnants of the Ottoman forces in the woods outside Sarikamish were collected, which signaled the end of fighting on this front. The Russian right wing cleared the Korik Valley. Enver's project ended in failure after 3 weeks of struggle amid high mountains and deep snowdrifts. For a time, at least, Russia was secure from attack in the Caucasus. Hafiz Haki expected that the Russians would use this success to capture the Erzurum fortress. The Third Army immediately tried to take measures, but this proved to be nearly impossible as all the local reserves were depleted. On February 12, Hafiz Haki died of typhus at the age of 36. Otto Liman von Sanders, who had been asked before, rejected the position again. Mehmet Kemal took the command of the army. War Minister Enver never commanded troops in battle again. Casualties. The Ottoman Third Army started with 118,000 fighting men. It was reduced to 42,000 effective soldiers in January 1915. There are conflicting figures for Ottoman casualties. Sources do not agree on what sold be included in the final sum. The Turkish official history states 32,000 killed, 15,000 died of sickness, 7,000 prisoners, 10,000 wounded, for some 50,000 total casualties. The casualties of the conflict escalated beyond the end of the active warfare period as the most immediate problem confronting the Third Army became the typhus epidemic. TAF presents a figure of 60,000 casualties throughout the period of the operation. Russians took 7,000 POWs including 200 officers. These prisoners were kept under confinement for the next 3 years in the small town of Arnavino east of Moscow on the Vetlogar River. After the final days of the Tsarist Empire, these soldiers had a chance to return to the ailing Ottoman Empire. Russian losses were 16,000 killed in action and 12,000 died of sickness, mostly due to frostbite. TAF sources report around 30,000 fatalities without giving details on the breakdown of this number.